date for Britain, supposedly, at least the original date, was for them to leave the European Union tomorrow, on Friday. That does not seem to be what is going to take place. There has been utter chaos with the Prime Minister working on a deal for several years and not able to get that deal through Parliament. Not just not able to get the deal through Parliament, but there is such resentment towards the deal that the deal was voted down in historic measures, not once, but twice. Parliament said no, which meant that there is no other competing deal on the table, and they were set to leave on the 29th. Now, that date has been extended because they've essentially had to beg the European Union to give them more time to avoid a no-deal Brexit. But that still doesn't necessarily give them ideas on what to do. There's been a series of indicative votes. Those are just votes where the Parliament takes control itself to give certain measures that can be voted upon. You know, yay or nay for this option, this option, this option, this option. You have a list of options. None of those were voted upon, meaning none of those had exceeded the vote, meaning they're still back in the same situation that they were in prior. And if I'm being honest, the indicative votes didn't have to be acknowledged by the Prime Minister. There would have been pressure to, but the Prime Minister didn't have to follow them. This is chaos. The European Union is pissed off, as you can understand why. The public is pissed off, again, as you can understand why. And still we're left with the situation that there is no viable option to get through Parliament for them to have any kind of situation where they leave without there being this kind of ripping away, this chaos. The Prime Minister, and one more point, Bercow, that's the last point. Bercow came out and said the Prime Minister wasn't going to be allowed to bring her withdrawal bill for a third time. Because, after all, if you're voting on it once and Parliament gives you its stamp, how do you keep bringing it back over and over and over again if the vote of Parliament means anything in the first place? I mean, after all, the Prime Minister said no new referendums, right? We've had a referendum. We're going to initiate the referendum that the public said. Then why are you bringing back the vote multiple times over and over again? Bercow said, you can't do this again. This is against our regulations. And he's been Speaker of the House. It's his ruling. This, of course, throws them into further chaos because, again, this was the only deal on the table that is now off the table. The Prime Minister makes an adjustment to the deal. Her change to the deal is that they would separate the withdrawal agreement from the future relationship. Meaning, we'll leave, but we have no idea what's going to take place after we leave. And this is what they're going to vote on Friday, tomorrow. The Prime Minister has offered her head. She's offered her head. The Prime Minister has thrown herself on her own sword and missed. That joke is hilarious to me, and I love that joke. And that is the joke that's been running about on media today. The Prime Minister throws herself on her own sword and misses. I will give you my head. I will not work with the next negotiations of the Brexit deal. Meaning, what they're negotiating now is just the parameters for which they're going to negotiate later. This is not even the entirety of what the exit looks like. And she's making the point, look, I won't be a part of this. I'll resign. You guys can fight over it. I'll resign. Just let this deal go through. With my last dying breath, let this deal go through. And they looked at her and said, no. That is what's taking place for Brexit. This update was going to be quick and to the point. I didn't want this one to go all that long. I just wanted to give this kind of... There's so much stuff that's happening from the standpoint of Brexit that if you follow it every day, there's some new thing that takes place every day. But it's still under the context of Brexit. It's being put under a pressure cooker because they're supposed to be at the point where they're leaving. And right now, they don't know what that means. No one has an idea of what Brexit means, which is somewhat problematic since you're supposed to technically be leaving tomorrow. It's fascinating, man. UK politics is fascinating. I don't think there's anything else. I mean, they're talking about like having a prime minister like Boris Johnson or Rees-Mogg, these hardcore Brexiteers, which the public said they wanted a Brexit. Nobody knew what Brexit meant. The Remainer, who's pushing for Brexit, wasn't able to get it done. Would somebody who's more hawkish on this idea of Brexit be able to? I don't know. Do they need to have an election in order to sort out what takes place? Meaning, does it need to be a situation where look, we can't get what we need to get through Parliament, so we need a new Parliament. And maybe a Parliament that can make a decision on things and have the public make a choice. Now, it's possible that the public ends up doing what it did prior and having this kind of split thing where 49-51 type issue. Once again, there was also this question on whether or not the Prime Minister was doing this on purpose. Meaning, was she incompetent? Or was she doing it on purpose to simply grind down the public will for Brexit? If we show them the chaos that ensues when we try to implement this process, will the public just get tired and not want to go through with the process? George Galloway, I watched George Galloway have a conversation and answer that very specific question. And Galloway's response to this was no. He knows these people. This is not intentional. This is to some degree incompetence. Galloway was behind the scenes on this. I don't think he's lying about it, which makes that even that much more terrifying. Like I said, I'm not going to keep this one long. Latin Rouge. May throws herself on her own sword and missed. Yeah, that was the joke. I didn't make that joke. This was, who said that? Right here. This was, I laughed so hard at it, I was like, I have to include it. Theresa May threw herself on her own sword and missed. Scottish National Party Pete Wishart had a dig at Theresa May. Theresa May, who yesterday offered to resign in an effort to persuade the skeptical members of the Conservative Party to vote for the Brexit deal. All signs are that the tactic has failed. Quoting the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, speaking in the Scottish National Parliament earlier today, he said, "This is a Prime Minister that threw herself on her own sword and missed." That is a brutal dig, man. That is brutal. God, that's a brutal joke. That's so brutal. But if you ever watch the SNP when they're attacking Theresa May in Parliament, they are brutal. They are brutal when they're going after Theresa May. So I thought this was hilarious. Seems odd people put this all on May. There's a huge gang behind her too. That's true, Bob. But you know, the problem here is she needs to make a choice. You can't serve two masters. And maybe the problem is you can't make a choice. Like, if she tries to be more on the Remain side, she's losing the Brexiteers. And if she tries to be more on the Brexiteer side, she loses the people who want to remain. This is, you know, she has somewhat this impossible task that she needs to resolve. But she was the one that put up the red lines. She was the one that is essentially controls the political process in the UK. This is her government. So, yeah, the buck to some degree stops with May, even though, you're right, Parliament is somewhat divided on this issue. Not to mention, by the way, she's the one who also called the snap election with this idea of breaking Labour. I feel bad for her to some degree, but I don't in most others. I feel bad in the sense that this was somewhat of an impossible task. By the same token, she's a Tory, she's conservative, and let's be honest, they tend to be pretty rapacious. How many food banks have increased in Britain since Theresa May has been in office? And I would say that all of those people who don't have access to the things that they need because of the things that the Tory party is being doing, even with this idea of the assistance plan that they did that made it difficult for people to get actual assistance. Just saying, her and her party are not the best of people. Let's say it that way. So, you know, the chaos that's ensuing, that is falling down on her head, my sympathies go only but so far. I don't want harm to come to Britain on this case, though. So, you know, there's that. But there's the secondary question of, is it possible for Jeremy Corbyn to enact the policies that he wants to enact while being part of the European Union? And if that answer is no, then this question of Brexit to me becomes a little bit more clarified. That's it. This is Brexit, at least on Thursday, March 28th. I'll leave it here. Thanks, so.